mind often drifts back to Kaiser's Nook on crisp autumn nights such as this, particularly my 10th year of existence, for it was the most horrendous of my life. 1996. It was a year that the North American blizzard bombarded the entire East Coast. The year I became interested in the folklore of witches after watching The Craft. The year I learned the Macarena and the meaning of the word ironic from Alanis Morissette. But more than anything else, I remember it was the year when I met pure evil. When Dr. Skelton's Harvest Carnival came to our humble town. It was the 20th of October. The air was thick and raw with the scent of freshly fallen leaves and dewdrops that morning. My best friend, Kelly, and I had no idea that a carnival was scheduled to arrive in Kaiser's Nook. We spent that morning like we had any other Saturday, clad in cozy pajamas, with plates of blueberry waffles as we sat in front of the TV watching Goosebumps. We had peace and quiet on the Saturdays spent at my house, for I was an only child. But on occasions, such as this one, when we stayed at Kelly's, her little sister, Clara, buzzed about trying to capture our attention and distracting us from the frightful tales of R.L. Stine. "I want to watch the big comfy couch," Clara whined. "It's not on," we both shouted in unison. She held a clunky VHS tape out in front of her. "I have my tape and Nana told me I could watch it." Kelly glowered at her. "Nana isn't even here. Well, she called on the phone and said that by the time I finished watching it, she'd be here to drop us off at the carnival." That got her attention. "What carnival?" I demanded. "There's no carnival in town," my friend chimed in. Clara was gloating. Rarely did she ever hold a piece of information that we weren't privy to, and on the scarce incidents that she did, it was never as juicy as the statement that she had just hit us with. We'd missed the state fair that year, and our little hearts had been shattered to pieces because of it. That night I dreamed of sugary pastel blue and pink cotton candy swirled about white paper cones, of barking carnies manning the controls of the Ferris wheel, and mutant animals eating grass and hay from wooden troughs inside the Museum of Unnatural Things. And oh, how I miss the sweet taste of caramel apples and kettle corn, the way the breeze whipped through my hair as I rode the scrambler, the sound of the gravel crunching beneath my feet as I made my way to the big top to see the hypnotists and magicians. Even the scent of the cow palace and horse stalls stirred a longing within me that I couldn't seem to squelch. The air that night blew through the wide-open living room window of the Carrington residence, bringing me back to reality. "Are you messing with us, Clara?" I asked sternly. "No," she replied. "Nana says that Dr. Skelton's Harvest Carnival arrived in town last week." "What kind of carnival sets up at night?" Kelly was puzzled. "The Halloween kind?" her sister insisted. My heart raced with enthusiasm. A Halloween carnival. I mean, surely there was no better type of fall celebration that existed in all the world. And what a moniker! Dr. Skelton's Harvest Carnival. Wow. I tried to imagine what Dr. Skelton must look like. A tall man, I was certain of that, lanky and gaunt with an angular face. And in my childish mind, I imagined that he looked quite similar to a skeleton. For what man with a name like this would be burly, stout man with sinewy muscles and squat features? "Well, what about Jenna?" said Kelly. "Her parents are out of town and she's staying here until next Friday." My throat went dry. It hadn't occurred to me that I would not be invited to such an event. I had to go, though. I just had to. Nana's taken all three of us, Clara declared as she pushed her way past us and slid her tape into the VCR. The sound of a rooster crowing came from the television speakers. The sun, donning a clown nose, rose over the giant green and white couch on the screen as Clara clapped her hands excitedly. Without saying a word to one another, Kelly and I ran up the stairs and into her room to change and prepare for a day of adventure. We hadn't realized that this day would haunt us for the rest of our lives. The sun was a pale, buttery yellow that October morn, like a giant lemon macaroon surrounded by clouds resembling white spun sugar. The sky was an expanse of azure blue as leaves danced circles on the forenoon breeze. As Kelly's grandmother dropped the three of us off at the front entrance, the air around us was sharp, thick with the scent of sweet candy floss, mingled with the unwelcome stench synonymous with large crowds. But how I loved it so. Tents gleamed, bright red, ruby-like, the candy apples on a stick being sold for $3 a pop. Flags snapped in the wind, fluttering above flame-covered canvas. Rickety booths boasted the delicious smells of funnel cake and French fries. Kelly, Clara, and I marched directly into the midway. Sideshow posters flapped on poles revealing a Catwoman, a sorceress, a human pretzel, and even a two-headed goat. My heart felt as though it might burst with glee. What a remarkable place this was. I mean, not even in my wildest dreams could I have pictured such a perfect Halloween celebration. A man dressed as a vampire loomed high above us on gigantic stilts. An old gypsy woman sat at her crystal ball, tarot cards in hand, ready to predict the future. I'd never seen anything so fascinated in my whole life, until I saw the knife thrower. A gentle breeze blew his long ebony hair around him like a halo. His piercing emerald green eyes focused intently on the apple perched atop his assistant's head as he threw a small dagger right into the fruit's center, pinning it to the board behind her. His muscular arms flexed as he reached down for a drink of water. He was a stunningly handsome man, and my 10-year-old eyes goggled at the sight of him. Somewhere in the distance, someone piped out what sounded like the band played on, and from behind us a deafening voice roared to life, announcing the attractions awaiting within the sideshow tent. "Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, to Dr. Skelton's Harvest Carnival," he began. "We have such sights to show you, the sideshow of the sinister, and to a world of the truly bizarre, a world of dark wonders that make your most depraved nightmares a horrifying reality." Kelly and I gazed at each other in wonderment as the pudgy man continued with this fiendish propaganda. "Do you dare explore the shadows of the most wicked visions on the planet? Do you dare cast your eyes upon the cruel oddities of nature? Come face to face with the monstrous beast from the very pits of the underworld. Witness death-defying acts that pivot on the brink of doom." He took in a deep breath, his face reddened to the same shade as his thinning hair as he girded himself for his big finish. Prepared to leave behind the conventional world as a bystander of our demonstration of the demented, a debut of disillusionment so diabolical that those who enter are never the same again. Step this way, but remember, there is no turning back. Kelly and I were sold, but it took more than a little coaxing to get Clara to agree to enter the tent, so we decided to bribe her. But the bribes swiftly turned into blackmail once she'd realized that we would do just about anything to convince her to go inside. At first, we had to buy her a corn dog. Then we had to take her on the carousel 3 times. Next, we bought her a balloon animal giraffe that was handcrafted by the Carnival's own Trickster the Clown. His head was completely shaven, but for a tiny powder blue ponytail that formed into a curlicue at the top of his head. The clown's entire bust was covered in white makeup. His eyes were painted the same color as his hair. Black liner ringed the turquoise orbs, then tapered into small teardrops that streamed down his cheeks. The ball of Trickster's nose domed a tiny cherry-hued spiral. He'd applied an enormous smile with the use of lipstick, and the garish grin soared from his cheek to his cheekbones, white needle-like teeth decorating the expanse of crimson. Trickster was terrifyingly inviting. It surprised us how Clara had taken to him despite his menacing appearance. Perhaps it was the squeaky voice in which he spoke, or his mastery of balloon animal construction. Lastly, Clara forced us to play 5 games of ring toss and give her all the candy prizes we'd won. Kelly packed 3 ring pops and 2 packs of Fun Dip into her miniature backpack as we made our way to the ticket stand. At the entrance of the sideshow, a tiny man awaited us. He was eye level with Clara, who was tickled pink to see an adult who was her size. The dwarf was an older man, probably mid-50s, clad in a full suit. A white shirt with red pinstripes peeked from beneath his black jacket, and he lifted a straw pork pie hat from his bald head and gestured with a bow. "Welcome, ladies. My name is Kunkel, and I'll be your guide through our attraction of the abnormal." "Tickets, please," he said, holding out a wrinkled hand that was decorated with a gaudy garnet ring. As we handed over our tickets for admission, Clara stood between Kelly and I, reaching out to hold each of our hands. Even at 8 years old, she was too proud to admit that she was afraid. But a promise was a promise, and she held firmly to us as Kunkel guided us to the first exhibit. Clara relaxed immediately. Behind the enclosure, we were greeted by a goat with 2 heads. And let me tell you, what a sight it was. "Ladies, feast your eyes on one of the world's only living 2-headed goat," the little man started. "Meet Will and Liam, also known as Billy Goat. Born in the far-off eastern city of Beijing, the twins were born with Dicephalus parapogus dipus." Billy didn't seem to notice that anyone was watching him. The goat simply ate chunks of meat from its trough and made small bleating noises of satisfaction. "I didn't know goats eat meat," said Kelly. "Ah, normally they don't," Kunkel explained, "but Billy here is a special goat, so we feed him a special diet." "Well, what kind of meat?" I asked. Kunkel smiled at us. "Well, whatever's handy. We Carnival folk can't afford prime rib, so we give him what we could get our hands on, and he's happy to have it, as you can see." The little man gestured back to the goat, with a stringy chunk of pink meat in each of its mouths. "Kinda looks like pork," I observed. "This way to the next exhibit," Kunkel instructed as he used his crooked walking stick to slowly part a set of moth-eaten curtains that acted as dividers. In the next room, we found a beautiful brunette with a Betty Boop hairstyle, sprawled out on a black velvet chase lounge, filing her nails into sharp points. One slender leg spilled forth from the slit of her leopard print dress. "Behold, "Maya, the Catwoman!" Kunkel roared. The woman simply smirked and continued to focus on her manicure, descendant of the Egyptian cat goddess Bastet. Her facial expression showed mock awe as she made an inaudible "ooh" with her pouty, glossed lips. As you could see, she has the temperament of a cat, and it seems she isn't very friendly today. "Does that mean we get a refund?" asked Kelly. Kunkel rapped his staff against the dirty floor harshly. "Maya, give these young ladies what they paid for," he demanded. Quick as a flash, Maya was off the couch and face to face with us, her claw-like fingers gripping the guardrail ferociously. We jumped back in surprise. She smiled viciously at us, revealing elongated canine teeth. Our mouths dropped open as we took in this spectacular encounter. Maya's eyes were brilliant green, but even more amazing were the pupils. They were diamond-shaped, cat's eyes. She hissed at us, causing Clara to hug her sister tightly around the waist. The Catwoman laughed wickedly as we rushed forward and into the next exhibit. The man in that room was dressed in an orange prison jumpsuit. He sat posed in what appeared to be an electric chair waiting for us to come closer. A burly man in his early 30s, rugged in appearance but soft in his facial expressions. Perhaps his features were softened because he could tell that we were frightened. Kunkel walked over to an odd-looking switch that was just his height. "May I present to you, fresh from Smolenska Mitrovica prison in Serbia, Vladimir Voltiek, the human lightning rod." Not even the most powerful electric chair was able to execute him. We suddenly became aware of the little man's hand on the switch. "Don't try this at home, girls," he advised before he flipped it. The hum of electricity buzzed in the air as Vladimir Voltiek sat unaffected in the hot seat. Sparks flew all around him, and he remained unbothered. Finally, Kunkel flipped the device off and walked over to the prisoner, light bulb in hand. Behold, the human lightning rod produces his own electrical current. And with this, he placed the bulb into Vladimir's mouth. It produced an immense glow, and we clapped enthusiastically at the spectacle before us. What a mind-boggling experience this was. We could hardly wait to see what the next exhibit was. A lovely young woman in a ruby-encrusted bikini smiled at us as we walked into the next exhibit. In each hand, she held out small torches which she spun about, creating fiery circles. Her auburn hair was streaked with blonde, giving the illusion of flaming locks. The left side of her ribcage displayed what appeared to be red and gold scales, and as she smiled, the young lady flashed a pair of vampire-like fangs at us. For your viewing pleasure, I present you with Blaze, half human, half dragon. She was born with fire in her soul. Watch as she manipulates the flames to submit to her will. Blaze ran the torches over her tongue before closing her mouth over the fireball. With a mighty exhalation, she shot forth the stream of fire that was so close it almost singed our eyebrows. Again we responded with thunderous applause, and Blaze bowed in appreciation. Entering the final room, I couldn't help but notice how the atmosphere had changed immensely. Whereas the previous exhibits had a tinge of horror meshed with lightheartedness, the air in this room hung heavy with hostility. A fog machine blasted a heavy mist that shrouded whatever was on the other side of the guardrail. Clara coughed, and we heard the sound of rattling chains to the left of us. Kunkel used his miniature baton to push us away from the railing. Stand back, girls. This one can get a little nasty. The sound of running feet pounded against the ground as the metal restraints clanked. A ravenous growl was hurled at us as I laid eyes on the most hideous creature I'd ever seen. It was a man, but it wasn't a man. Wearing only a pair of black shorts, he appeared to be in his early 20s. His face was that of a skull, his bald head donned, and an anatomically correct brain. His arms, legs, ribs, hands, and feet were all tattooed like the bones of a skeleton. The spaces between were covered with depictions of muscle tissue. As the monster in front of us twisted and writhed on the other side of the gate, I could see illustrations of spiderwebs on the inside of his ears. His shoulders and back were decorated with drawings of spinal column and accompanying muscles. The man's tongue spilled forth from his mouth, exposing the work of a true artist. A tarantula seemed to crawl over his tongue as he swiveled his taste buds and made the arachnid dance. It disappeared as he ran his tongue over his lips, and a thick silver hoop hung from the skin on its underside. "Why, look, the midget brought me a tasty snack," he said in a gravelly voice thick with a German accent. "I'm only a little hungry now, so I'll settle for this one." The beastly creature reached a hand out, attempting to grab Clara, who let out a high-pitched squeal of fright. Kunkel rapped the man on his knuckles with the stick. "Jorgen, you leave her alone. The boss told you about grabbing people. You heard him? The next time you do it, you have to answer to him." Jorgen rubbed his red knuckles and pouted. "This is Jorgen Roth, the illustrated man. Pay no attention to him, he just likes to tease kids." "That's not so's word," he interjected. "I love little girls." We relaxed at the gentle tone in his voice, especially with the side of Grumbier-Kischelsler and a glass of lager. We recoiled and huddled together as he bellowed out a devilish laugh. Clara burst into tears, tore herself free from us, and ran out of the tent. Chasing after her, we abruptly ran into a man dressed entirely in black, wearing a suit complete with matching vest, top hat, ascot, and leather gloves. The man held out his hands to stop us in our tracks and crouched down to look Clara in the eye. There was an air of elegance to the man. His eyes were a rich chocolate brown, his jet-black hair was cropped at the base of his neck, and a perfectly trimmed beard and mustache framed his friendly smile. He steadied his squatting form with a beautiful walking stick. The base of it was solid black, but the head was that of a cobra, sculpted entirely from silver, its eyes fashioned from 2 rubies. Placing a hand on Clara's shoulder, he asked, "What seems to be the problem?" The man's gentle tone immediately caused our tension and fear to dissipate. "Roth," spat Kunkel. "He's going overboard with scaring the kids again." "He said he was going to eat me," Clara blubbered. The knife thrower soon came over to see what the fuss was about. "He's a bad seed, Dr. Skelton," he insisted. "You should have gotten rid of him years ago." Dr. Skelton patted Clara on the back. Reaching into his pocket, he pulled out what appeared to be 3 tickets. "There, there, little one," he whispered. "We won't let him hurt you, and we certainly aren't in the habit of upsetting our friends, are we, Fane?" The knife thrower shook his head. "Certainly not, sir." Dr. Skelton handed each of us small scraps of paper. "Please, accept these tickets as my apology. We are having a special show as a prize for those children who won tickets at the High Striker game. Consider these a gesture of goodwill. From us to you." Clara smiled softly. Clearly all was forgiven. These tickets include a spectacular show complete with a free ice cream cone. Will we see you there? Kelly's sister looked at her pleadingly. My friend nodded her head in agreement. We'll be there. Stupendous, chortled Dr. Sculton. The show starts in 10 minutes over at the big top tent. I'd better run along and grab your seats. We were surprised to find that only 3 other children had acquired tickets. Surely this was a special circus attraction, if only 6 kids were present. Trickster was the first to appear. Pushing a rickety cart with squeaky wheels, he began handing out cones topped with bright orange scoops of ice cream. Clara and Kelly downed theirs quickly, but the bitter pumpkin-flavored ice cream didn't sit right with me. Its chalky aftertaste left something to be desired, so after 3 bites, I let mine fall under the bleachers. Blaze was the first act to take the stage. In each hand she held the flaming fan and did a memorizing dance to the cult song Fire Woman. Soon the fans were replaced by devices that looked like balls of fire tethered to strings. Her charismatic movements were captivating, and soon she ran 2 small torches along her tongue before blowing a plume of flames at the audience, who promptly responded with applause. Next, Poppy Jane Pemberton, the human pretzel, took the stage. It was almost impossible to believe that anyone could be so flexible. Laying on her stomach, she twisted her legs over top of her head, and with the pen posed between her toes, she drew a picture of Trickster holding balloons. It was incredible, as she sat upright with her arms twisted behind her head and used her feet to light a match and a cigarette. I began to grow tired, though. It had been a busy day, and I longed for my bed as I watched Poppy Jane bring the cigarette to her lips using just her feet. She blew smoke rings of various sizes before taking a final bow and clearing the platform for the magician. The astonishing alchemy was strikingly beautiful. She was a tall, slender woman of Asian descent. Her long black hair hung like a cathedral-length wedding veil, sweeping across the ground with each delicate movement she made. Her first trick was indeed astonishing. Alchemy danced and twirled to the rhythm of Donovan's Season of the Witch. With each turn, her fringed dress and velvet gloves changed colors. First, a bright aquamarine, next a coppery russet, before swiftly transforming into a lovely shamrock hue. Candy apple red, indigo, canary yellow, violet. Every move transformed her outfit into a new shade of rainbow. We couldn't believe her eyes. She followed up with several sleight-of-hand tricks and finished with the vanishing act. Now at this time, a large wheel with the girl strapped to it was pushed into the ring. It was soon followed by Fane, carrying an array of knives with him. Looking around, I noticed that the other children appeared to be drowsy as well. We all had a big day, and it seemed that the moment we had a chance to sit down, it caught up with us. The backdrop of the wheel was painted white with a red spiral, like a hypnotist's twirling disc. As the woman attached to it began to spin, I could feel myself drifting off to sleep. Surely a quick nap wouldn't hurt. I closed my eyes for the briefest of moments, thinking nothing of it. But little did I realize that this would be the biggest mistake that I would ever make. I was awakened by the sound of disembodied voices. Certainly I must have been dreaming, for the conversation made no sense. I could hear Dr. Sculton's voice. We don't have a lot of time left before that stuff wears off, and we still have 2 more. I'll tell the others to back quickly so that we can make a clean break for it, said the heavily accented voice. That's another thing. How many times have I told you to not grab the kids? Dr. Skelton scolded. The last thing we need is to have the cops sniffing around because some redneck saw you trying to grab them. There were strange squishing noises filling the air, along with a strange chewing sound. I struggled to open my eyes and had trouble moving. The tent was barely lit. All of the circus lighting was gone, and several old-fashioned lanterns illuminated the tent. Dr. Skelton continued. We got a great haul this time. It's hard to come by one so young. Normally we could get our hands on a 12-year-old, maybe 10, but this has to be 6 or 7. And that one can't be older than 5. When my eyes finally opened, I was witness to the most horrifying, the most atrociously evil sight that I had ever or would ever lay my eyes on. Next to Dr. Skelton's feet was a metal bucket filled with ice, topped with several small organs, kidneys, hearts, lungs, and even livers. In his hand was a small scalpel covered with the blood of one of the boys we'd shared the bleachers with earlier. His dissected body lay in pieces on the cart that the ice cream had been wheeled in on. Dr. Skelton was removing one of the boy's arms from his torso. Kelly lay next to me, unconscious, unaware of the horrible fate that awaited us. Clara and the other 2 boys were gone. But where had they gone? There were no bodies, not even a lock of hair or a stitch of clothing. And that's when I became cognizant of the chewing sounds again. Now that I was more aware of my surroundings, I noticed that the chomping was accompanied by familiar bleating. My stomach churned as I watched Billy the goat eating what was left of Clara. I wanted to scream, but no sound would come, even more so when Will and Liam began to fight over the piece of meat that had been Clara's left cheek. I recognized it from the small, jagged scars she obtained when she'd scratched it on a branch falling from a tree last summer. I had to rouse Kelly. The men were distracted by their conversation, and as I continued to shake my friend, I noticed movement at the other side of the tent. The other carnies were coming in, bogged down with their props and costumes, ready to pack up and leave. Hastily, I lay back down to avoid drawing attention to myself. Through half-open eyelids, I peered over at the flurry of activity. They were packing everything they could get their hands on near the opening of the tent, no doubt planning for a quick getaway once they disposed of us. But there was no way that I was going to let that happen. They might have already taken Clara, but they weren't getting their filthy hands on Kelly or me. Not without a fight. Maya's voice broke through the commotion. I'm not riding with him again, she shouted. He won't keep his hands off me. Then ride with Blaze. No, you don't, grumbled Blaze. The last time he rode with me, I was ready to set a torch to him. The man's got more hands than an octopus. Let him ride with Poppy Jane. The illustrated man's voice entered the conversation from across the tent. Now there's an idea, he said with a chuckle. I love flexible women. Will the 3 of you just knock it off? Dr. Skelton's voice rang out loud and clear. You will ride with who I tell you to ride with, or you can stay here and take the blame for all of this. He pointed to the tub filled with Wiggins. They all quieted and went back to arranging their items. That's what I thought, he said. Kelly stirred beside me. Her eyes fluttered as she began to come to. Holding a hand over her mouth, I shushed her as quietly as I could. We have to get out of here. I'll explain later. Where's Clara? She quietly asked. She's not here. There's no time to explain. Can you move? She rolled onto her side slowly and flexed her arms and legs. I'm kind of stiff, but I can move. Suddenly there was a loud clamor. The pile of boxes and bags that they'd been compiling fell all over the place. The costumes, the electric chair, the chase lounge, ropes and string lights, everything laid sprawled around the tent. We could hear the human lightning rod cussing as he tried to sit his prop chair back up. Now whether it was fate, divine intervention, or just dumb luck, I'll never know. But one of Blaze's fuel bottles rolled over to where we laid. I advised Kelly to follow my lead, then grabbed the bottle and made for the other side of the tent. Because of the commotion, the group had almost overlooked us entirely, but it was the illustrated man who noticed us running for the small opening at the side of the big top. "They're getting away," he shouted, taking off after us like a shot. I knew that Kelly was still groggy, and the chances of him catching us were very good. When a human being is faced with danger, there are only two courses of action: a fight or flight. I chose both. Popping open the cap to the fuel bottle, I sprayed it in a long line, then threw one of the lanterns into the stream. I pushed Kelly beneath the small opening of the canvas and waited for the illustrated man to come closer. The flames grew higher and higher as he approached, and my child's mind did not register the difference between justice and vigilante retribution. Fury welled up inside me at the thought of Clara being taken apart and fed to that violet goat. I had to take it out on someone, and he was only a few footfalls away. Raising the plastic bottle into the air, I sprayed what was left of the fuel onto him. The mineral oil had just coated his face and torso when the flames took him and the screaming began. When I ran out of a tent, I met Kelly on the other side. We could hear the ruckus. Items were being knocked over, flames were spreading, people were screaming. Even the goat let out terrible wails as we stood in the midway and watched the fire carry them back to hell where they belonged. The fire department soon arrived, but they'd be too late to help anyone. Apparently, Jorgen Roth had run headlong into the crowd of his fellow Carnival workers, catching everything in his path on fire. Their premature packing had worked against them. It blocked their only exit, and they were trapped inside the inferno. I was glad. The cold autumn wind returned the scraps of sideshow posters that lay on the carnival grounds. It carried them up towards the stars that sparkled like points on a giant compass guiding our way home. As the moon watched, Kelly and I made our way through the trees and back into town. The town clock struck 10 o'clock at night. The fire showed in the far-off west as we shuffled home silently. Unable to face what had happened to Clara, Kelly's family moved to another state not long after the night of the fire. We tried to keep in touch, but what could we really say to each other? That night had changed us both forever, and as soon as I turned 18, I left Kaiser's Nook, and I haven't returned since. But the nightmares still continue, even in my waking hours, because you cannot destroy evil. It simply changes forms. At night, when I lay my weary head on my pillow, I can almost see Maya's cat eyes watching me. I could still hear the barker calling out the sideshow offerings, and the smell of sickeningly sweet cotton candy. And worst of all, I could still taste that horrible laced ice cream that was the catalyst to my loss of innocence forever. But I can't help think of Clara as I lay here dying, awaiting a kidney transplant that will possibly never come. My actions brought about the demise of all those carnival workers who were harvesting organs. And now it seems that I will meet my maker because of an organ that I desperately need, but can't get. Now isn't that ironic? I was ready to die. It's funny, we as human beings, we like to imagine ourselves as fighters, like to think that when death grips us by the throat, prepared to drag us into whatever beyond awaits us, that we'll instinctively resist, either out of desperation to live, or even some deeply ingrained sense of pride that won't allow us to pass on without a struggle. Maybe it's like that for some, but it wasn't like that for me. I don't know why though. I had so much to live for. I had a family who meant everything to me, a good job, close friends, and every reason in the world to want to fight for my life. But despite all of this, I was overcome with a hard apathy that prevented me from caring even the slightest bit about all the blessings in my life. The struggle proved too hard, and I wasn't able to fight. With death looming nearby, these were the thoughts that went through my mind as my body convulsed with violent shivers. The wind howled around me, seemingly shrieking with laughter as it pelted me mockingly with fat snowflakes, symbolically tarring and feathering me before my death. I wrapped the emergency blanket tighter around my body, and I rocked back and forth, thumping lightly against the rear right fender of my car. Immediately behind me was the shredded tire of my 2008 Ford Focus. A large stone covered by snow on the road had decimated the tire, reducing it to thin strips of rubber that dutifully clung to the metal frame that remained. Initially, I was merely annoyed about having to get out of the car in the freezing storm to change the tire. When I popped open the trunk and discovered that the tire iron was missing, I'd begun to panic. Staying out in this weather for more than a few minutes was dangerous, life-threatening even. I entertained the idea of getting back into my car and driving to the nearest gas station on the destroyed tire. The car was running on fumes. There's no way it would have been able to drag the dead weight of its back end through the ever-thickening snow on the already precarious canyon road. Desperately, I had tried to twist the bolts off of the tire with my bare fingers. The icy weather made the appendages incredibly delicate and raw, but I nonetheless struggled for minutes that felt like eternity until my throbbing fingers were numb and coated with a thick covering of frozen blood. Having destroyed my hands, I pondered my other options. I could get into the car and blast the heater, but what would that do? The battery might last a few hours, possibly even until the storm passed. But that wasn't very likely, and once the battery was dead, I would be stranded. Granted, I could run the engine, but with how little gas remained in the tank, that would only end up in the same result. Ultimately, either option would only prolong my hypothermic death. If I was going to die in either case, then I saw no purpose in extending my life, only to watch frostbite work its way over my body. I closed my eyes and I leaned back against the car, trying my hardest to ignore the spasmodic attempts of my body to keep blood running through my veins. But interestingly, I wasn't sad. I wasn't frustrated, bitter, or anything. I really didn't feel any emotion. Rather than thinking of my family, my mind played back random YouTube videos. Minute details of things I noticed earlier that day, like the tiny tear in my waitress's apron at Denny's. Meaningless, sometimes mildly entertaining thoughts arbitrarily passed through my mind as my body slowly began to accept the inevitable. An image of my dog, Max, a gigantic husky, balancing on the bird bath of our neighbor's yard one sunny afternoon, was on my mind when, of their own accord, my eyes slowly reopened, like when you dreamily awaken from a deep sleep. Normally, what I saw would have caused a horrified shock to course through my body, but in my current state, I was merely confused, trying to process what I was seeing. No more than 10 feet in front of me stood a tall figure. It was draped in a long black coat with a high collar, effectively shielding its entire body from view. But instead of a person's head, it had a ram's head, or perhaps not a ram, but a goat or some kind of lamb. The animalistic head had the features and the horns of a ram, but appeared more juvenile, more innocent. The head that gazed back at me had tiny horns protruding from its forehead, and ivory fur that was frequently camouflaged in the ensuing snowstorm. Its eyes caught my attention, though. Its eyes were pure white sclera. Nothing else. No irises, no pupils. Nothing. Empty seas of whiteness that were only separated from the rest of its face by a dark black ring. It looked as if someone had taken a lighter and burned the fur surrounding its eyes in a circular shape, leaving a charcoal-colored black outline of its almond-shaped eyes. I stared at it stupidly. I didn't know what to make of this new entity before me. I was ready to close my eyes and resign myself to death once more when it spoke to me. Although it spoke without words, there was no audible voice, nor did it speak in my mind with words. It spoke to me through impressions. I felt a sudden urgency to get up and approach the being. I dimly shook my head no, trying to communicate that I had no control of my body, that I couldn't stand up no matter how hard I exerted myself. It pushed wordless encouragement into my mind, and I somehow knew that if I tried again, I could stand. I was able to, but not without effort. My legs were about as responsive as the legs of a toddler who barely mastered the art of standing. Every moment that I remained erect, my legs threatened to collapse beneath me. It was with great concentration that I was able to take awkward, heaving steps towards the figure, my body spasmodically shaking and shivering the entire time. The being was much bigger than I originally thought. Standing about 4 feet before it, I could see that it was easily over 7 feet tall, towering over me. Normally, I would have felt horrified. As it was, I simply stood before it, and had I not been shaking so much, would have shrugged as if to ask, "So, what do you want?" The front of its cloak ruffled slightly and parted down the middle as its hands extended outward. Like the rest of its body, the thing's arms were covered with thick black cloth, its hands wrapped in what looked like black leather gloves. Curiously, it seemed to have humanoid hands with 4 fingers and a thumb adorning each. But in its hands, it held an object that I would never have expected. I almost laughed out loud with the sheer absurdity of what I was seeing. Like how a person dying of thirst in the desert sees a mirage of an oasis. I believe my mind had conjured up some unreal image in an attempt to convince me that not all hope was lost. In its hands, the creature held the tire iron. It held the object as delicately as a flower girl holds the pillow upon which the wedding rings were rested. It presented it to me with reverence, as if I were holding a holy religious relic, and not a tool that is found in every automobile's trunk in the entire country. I reached out to grab it, but the being spoke to me again, harshly, almost angrily. And again no words were spoken or even conveyed into my brain, but I knew that I was not to take the tire iron unless I understood the gravity of what I was doing. This creature was doing me a favor. In fact, it was quite literally saving my life. It expected me to pay it forward, so to speak. It would bestow this gift upon me, with the understanding that I would use the tool not only for myself, but for its purposes as well. I'll be honest when I say I didn't fully understand. All I knew that this tool was my only chance of returning home to my family before hypothermia or frostbite overtook me. I nodded to the creature, and the oppressive feeling clutching my chest relented, replaced with a feeling of relief, of approval, and even of close affection, the kind of affection an adult feels towards an endearing infant child. And with limited control over my body, I was somehow miraculously able to return to my car, change the tire, and continue the drive back home. And that was 3 weeks ago. When I'd gotten home, my wife was on the phone with the police, ready to fill out a missing persons report. I stumbled in through the front door, and she had shrieked in a bizarre mixture of horror, relief, joy, and absolute frustration. She spoke to me, but I don't know what she said. All I could hear was the hot rush of blood flowing back into my head, into my hands, my feet, and all the other parts of my body where I had been too numb to feel anything. All I remember is that she stripped my wet clothes off of me, threw a thick wool robe over my naked body, wrapped me up in as many blankets as she could pile on me, and then pushed me into her car that was parked safely in the garage and sped me to the hospital. I was committed to the hospital for 2 days before the doctor felt confident enough that I could return home. I'd gotten frostbite on my left ear and both hands. The doctor had to amputate the ear as well as 2 fingers on my left hand and the pinky finger on my right hand. But I didn't care. My wife sobbed with gratitude as I exited the hospital, and she clung to me more closely than I ever saw any of our 3 children cling to her when they were nursing. I returned her embrace as well, fighting back the tears that threatened to spill over and down my cheeks. I can't believe that in my lowest moments I'd somehow been prepared to leave her and her family behind. And then life slowly returned to normal, and at some point I had dismissed the being that had greeted me in my near-death moment as some kind of wild hallucination, the malfunctioning of a desperate and horrid mind. When recounting the event to my wife, I completely omitted the character from the story. Doing so felt wrong, to say the least. I couldn't explain where I had obtained the life-saving tire iron, and when I had lied about it, saying that I found an abandoned car off the side of the road, I felt a conflicting feeling of deep shame and rage burn deep inside me. And in that moment, I had even felt afraid, superstitiously supposing that perhaps I might have incurred the wrath of that benevolent being in that storm. The feeling never fully passed, but became more muted. I attempted to continue with my life, but no matter what I was doing, that feeling never left me. At home, at work, playing with the kids, or even making love with my wife, that feeling plagued me. and I had an anxiety that grew inside me each day. All logic dictated that the being was a figment of my imagination, and that I had never made any kind of deal, nor was I in danger of angering some sort of mythical creature. I attributed the stress, the anxiety, the guilt, and all the fear to some kind of post-traumatic stress, and tried as hard as I could to push it out of my mind. My rationalizations could never set me fully at ease, though, and I knew that what I had experienced was real. I awoke one night in extreme discomfort. I often will wake up during the night to use the restroom or to get a drink or even just wake up for no reason at all. I'm a fairly light sleeper, and so I've grown accustomed to these late-night awakenings, and my wife typically sleeps through it. But tonight was different, though. I woke with a jump, thinking the house was on fire. The air around me was stiflingly hot, and I was sure that there must have been open flames in the room. When I opened my eyes, I wasn't greeted by blackness like usual. The room was cast in a deep red glow, which would have given credence to my worry that the house was on fire, except that the color was too deep. The color was visceral and thick, as though the room was engulfed in the blood of some kind of ethereal massacre. The light was dim, and I could barely see anything, but my eyes were quickly drawn to a being in the corner of the room, near the door. It was the same being that had met me that night I almost froze to death. But it was also completely different. The innocent, cherubic lamb's head that had once gazed at me was replaced with an adult ram's head. There were no eyes. Sockets were filled with insects crawling in and out of them, venturing from the decayed ears to the nose and down into the mouth, out of which lolled the disgusting meaty tongue that was bloated and purple, seemingly ripe with infection. The creature no longer wore a cloak, but stood naked before me. It was even more imposing than before, where it was originally 7 feet tall. It must have been at least 10 feet tall if standing upright. But the creature leaned forward, supporting its weight on its knuckles as a gorilla would. It had the body of a person, enormous in every dimension, and equally as rotted as the head. The flesh was pale and sloughing off in large sections. Its abdomen had been decayed all the way through and vomited out a long tangle of intestines. A symphony of 1,000 flies buzzed around the creature as cockroaches and other unspeakable parasites darted in and out of the numerous open sores covering its ruined body. Only after seeing the repulsive rotting carcass before me did I notice the overwhelming stench in the room. Images of concentration camps and rotting bodies pushed in mass into open ditches flashed through my mind every time I inhaled, imagining that those scenes still paled in comparison to the reek that was wafting off the thing standing in front of me. Underlining all this was an impressive feeling that punctuated every second. Rage. The bed frame, the photos on the dresser, the mirror on the wall. Everything in the room that was even relatively loose rattled and shook as the creature emitted a deep growl of fury. From seemingly out of nowhere, the creature produced a tire iron and held it out in one enormous simian-like hand, similar to the offering it had the night it had saved my life. Immediately, I realized that I had insulted the creature by not honoring my end of the bargain. I had taken its life-saving gift and used it for my own benefit, but I had failed to use the gift it gave me in order to carry out its own purposes. I climbed out of bed and approached the thing, the smell and heat increasing exponentially with every step that I took. It communicated to my mind the same way that I had before. It had given me the tire iron for a purpose, and now I must return the favor. I dared not look it in the face, and once I knew what it was that I needed to do, I simply nodded and gripped the tire iron with my left hand. The missing finger is a stark testament that my first encounter with this being was all too real. The metal of the tool was white hot, and I screamed in pain, but was too terrified not to retrieve the item. I lifted the tire iron and held it in both hands, then finally summoned the courage to lift my gaze toward the creature and meet its eyes, or what was left of them. When I looked up, however, the being had vanished, leaving me in a cold, air-conditioned room that was pitch black, save it be for the faint moonlight that trailed in through the window and the various LED lights of my wife's electronic devices. I knew what I had to do. I was too terrified to delay any longer than I already had. Clutching the tire iron in one hand, I made my way downstairs, and I climbed into my car. Home from work, I opened the front door and entered the house. For the second time in 4 months, my wife nearly tackled me to the floor, gasping in relief. "Oh, honey, I was so worried," she breathed, holding my face in her hands and resting her forehead against my chest. She always did this when she was trying to hide her tears from me. She was horribly upset about something. "I was watching the news," she continued, "and I was so worried that yours was one of the cars on the interstate." I grabbed her by the shoulders and pushed her away gently, not out of frustration or annoyance, but simply so I could see her face and look into her eyes. My suspicions were right. Tears were brimming in her eyes and threatened to spill at any moment. "I'm fine, Sarah." "Why would you be afraid that I was hurt?" I asked. She gestured to the TV in the living room where the news was playing live. "There was a major accident on the interstate. It made national news. No one has ever seen anything like it. On 9 different stretches of roads, cars had lost control. Cars had been losing control, running into the cement barriers, colliding with other cars. Even some diesels have flipped onto their sides and slid into oncoming traffic. There's already 40 people confirmed dead. They blocked off the entrances and exits and slowed traffic as much as they can. Hopefully they prevented more accidents, but those people..." Her voice choked out into a sob. "I was so worried you were one of them," she said, shaking her head, shoulders heaving with sobs that almost sounded like laughs. I looked over her shoulder into the living room and saw the image of a diesel laying on its side in flames, surrounded by other cars in a similar state of ruin. "What caused it?" I asked numbly. "Nobody's sure. The best guess is that a number of the cars had broken axles or something. A lot of the cars' tires just popped off while they were driving. One of the cars they examined apparently didn't even have any bolts holding the tires in place, and the tires that had stayed on looked like they'd been pivoted outward, ready to pop off. I just don't understand. How could this happen?" Sarah looked back up and stared into my eyes with such love and concern, and I turned my head away.